Hello friend, welcome back to my kitchen. Today we are tackling more of this year's garden tomatoes. So these tomatoes had been ripening on this table, and once they got really ripe, I did pop them into the fridge so they wouldn't go bad until we were ready to tackle them today. We are hopefully going to tackle 90% of these tomatoes on these two tables today. This morning, I pulled out the tomatoes that I had froze that needed to be dealt with right away or they were gonna go bad. They couldn't even be put in the fridge, they needed to be frozen. And I've actually started cooking them down on the stove now, and I know how many pounds those are because the recipe we're gonna be following today is based on pounds of tomatoes. And I have a little sticky note. Well, where'd my sticky note go? 14.9 pounds of tomatoes there. So the recipe we're gonna be following calls for 20 pounds per recipe. So we're gonna go ahead and see how many recipes worth we can make today. So I'm gonna be following the same recipe that we did last time, but we're gonna do it in a little different technique today to see if we can find an easier way to make this recipe. I'm gonna follow the same ratios and everything. So I just taired my bowl before I started weighing out these tomatoes. And I do need to wash these, and some of them might need to go to the chickens. It is technically fall now, so happy fall all. And we are gonna also be making a fall recipe. We're gonna make pumpkin cinnamon rolls. But I want to get my tomatoes going first so that those can be cooking down and reducing on the stove. Okay, so this is what we need to finish off that batch. So we've got 20 pounds between those tomatoes and now these tomatoes. I'm gonna set those tomatoes there. I'm gonna tear this bowl and we'll measure these. I did this morning strain out some homegrown pumpkin because we need some pumpkin for the pumpkin cinnamon rolls. When dealing with frozen pumpkin, sometimes it can be a little bit waterier than we want. So we'll make cinnamon rolls in just a minute. So I have not washed these. One of you all gave me the recommendation to wash the tomatoes as they come in. And I think that's a really good idea. The only thing I think about it is that I don't necessarily want a lot of moisture sitting on that table as they ripen. So that's why I have been washing them after they have ripened. Now the ones that I threw in the freezer, I did wash those so that I could just throw those directly into the pot and they could just start cooking down. Those are mostly heirloom varieties of tomatoes, and that's why I wanted to get those going first thing. I'm not even gonna pull the stems off because I'll show you how we're going to remove the stems. This recipe originally calls for you to roast the tomatoes. It is a roasted tomato sauce, not salsa, marinara sauce. And that does make for a really delicious sauce, but it is extremely time consuming. So my goal today is to see if I can get the same flavor without roasting them. I'm still gonna do the same ratios for the recipe. I'm gonna follow the recipe, except for instead of roasting it, we're gonna go ahead and just cook it on the stove, and we'll remove all the skins and seeds at the same time. I have saved enough tomato skins, I think, for what I want to make into tomato powder. That might be done in the freeze dryer. We might be able to take that out of the freeze dryer today. I'm not exactly sure. I started it yesterday. So if it's done, we will go ahead and empty the freeze dryer together and I can show you what tomato powder looks like.
Now I saved, I think, around 100 pounds worth of tomato skins. And I think I have enough. It was 4 full trays worth of skins that I put into my freeze dryer. And so I didn't think I needed to go through the effort of saving the skins with these tomatoes. I think that should be enough to get me through a year. And so I figured, since I think I have enough skins, we're gonna try if we can make this sauce in a much more efficient manner. And we wanna see if I can get the same result with way less effort. So if I was going to save the skins, I would need to roast them or blanch them to remove the skins, and then run them through the food mill. But because I don't want to save the skins, we're going to run all these tomatoes through the food mill so we can remove the skins and the seeds at the same time. Some people do save the skins and seeds when they run it through the food mill and turn that into powder, but I really don't want the tomato seeds in my powder, so that's why I freeze dried just the skins that I removed from making the diced tomatoes and when I roasted the tomatoes, and I didn't save it from running them through the mill.
So we officially now have 1 recipe's worth of tomatoes in here, and we're just gonna let this cook down until everything's soft. I want to go ahead and weigh out the rest of my tomatoes so I know how many batches we can get. This sauce is gonna be a little different than the last sauce because it's gonna have a lot more heirloom tomatoes in it than just Roma's. The last sauce did have heirloom tomatoes in it, but not as many as this one's gonna have. So it's gonna be interesting to have a couple, oh, it's also gonna have cherry tomatoes in it. So it's gonna be interesting to see how the flavor is different. My scale only goes to 11 pounds, so I have to make sure that I don't overdo it. Okay, so that is not quite 10 pounds yet. Okay, that's 10 pounds right there. That's almost 6 pounds. That's 7. I have this many tomatoes here that are not quite ripe yet. That's probably 5 pounds. I want to finish out this second batch, so I need another about 3 to 4 pounds to finish out this batch. And then I just called my sister because I think after today, with the sauce that we're gonna make, I'm gonna make enough marinara sauce and I won't do another big marinara sauce making day. So I just asked my sister, hey, all the rest of the tomatoes that are coming out, obviously other than the ones we're gonna eat fresh, do you want the abundance, the excess to make into sauce? And she said yes. So that's one less thing that I have to worry about, is doing another big marinara sauce making day, and we'll get our pantry full and my sister will be able to make some sauce as well. Okay, so I only need a few more pounds, a couple, and there's so many tomatoes out here, so she'll have plenty to put up a bunch of tomatoes. I mean, we'll still eat some fresh, just look at all those green ones. They're huge. Lots and lots and lots of green ones. Oh, I feel relieved that my sister wants to take my excess tomatoes. I am excited they're gonna go to a good home and she will turn them into something her family can really enjoy. So I went ahead and picked all these tomatoes that were ripe or blushing, that were a slicing tomato. I'm gonna need to go out there tonight and harvest everything that's blushing. I don't have time to do that right now because we're supposed to get a bunch of rain tomorrow. And what I'll do for my sister is I will just keep those tomatoes there and I will ripen them and bring them to her once they are ripe. Or I will ask her if she wants me to bring them to her tonight. Maybe I'll do that. I'll let her finish ripening them. And then when the other big batch of tomatoes comes out, I will bring those to her and she can throw them in her freezer or do whatever she wants with them and make sauce however she'd like. And I will bring her some of the cinnamon rolls we're gonna be making together in just a bit. But now I officially know that we have 2 batches worth. We've got one 20-pound batch of tomatoes in there. This is 20 pounds right here that I need to wash and cut the tops off. I'm gonna get these over here. These ones can keep ripening here. And then at some point I can take this second table down, and I don't think I'm gonna need this second table for the rest of the year. These are ones that are gonna go to the chickens and they will be very happy about it. So now it's time to wash these and prep these. This little tool is really nice when working with slicing tomatoes to get the core out. Look how easy that is. For the Romas and San Marzanos, I still like a knife just to cut the tops off. Some of these heirlooms, after washing and removing the core, I'm gonna go ahead and just squeeze some of those seeds out. We have a long way to go with that tomato sauce. It needs to reduce by about half. Now, one thing is we were able to fit 4 batches in that pot last time, 4 1/4 batches actually. And so the roasting process definitely reduced a lot of the moisture. So we're still gonna get a nice thick sauce, but instead of taking the time to do it in the oven, we're gonna do some of it or all of it on the stove. That definitely is way more time efficient to do it this way, but the true test is the flavor. And my kitchen is not a crazy disaster like it was the day that we did the tomato sauce last time. So what I wanna do now is actually get our onions going, because that's the next veggie prep we need for this. But the first thing I needed to do before we could do the onions is I needed to know how many batches we were gonna get, so I know how many onions to slice up. So I'm gonna get my cutting board rinsed off here, and then we're gonna go downstairs, and we need to get a couple ingredients to finish off this sauce. I can't tell you how much of a disaster my kitchen was last time we did this versus today. It is relatively clean. We do have some dishes piling up here. My dishwasher is clean with jars that I washed to fill with our sauce, but this is gonna take a few hours for this to cook down. And look what I found. This is the best canning ladle because look, it rests on the side of the pot. So that's ready for us when we're ready to jar up this sauce, but it'll be a few hours. So let's go do some grocery shopping downstairs. So I just got the rest of the ingredients we need to finish out this sauce. And I do need to reference my book, which I keep up here. It'll probably open right to it. Let's see. So for every recipe, I need 1.5 cups of chopped onions and 1 cup of red wine. So let's get this going because we want our onions to caramelize. I grabbed up a few more onions than I'm gonna need for today, but I'll just use those in this week's cooking. And I do like to wash off my onions after I cut them open and rinse my cutting board off, just because these are homegrown onions. And they do sometimes tend to bring in a little bit of dirt with them. I think I'm gonna go ahead and cut one more. So to caramelize these onions, I'm gonna go ahead and use this 5-clad stainless steel frying pan and do it right on the stove as opposed to in the oven. I'm gonna get this on pretty high heat. Today's video is sponsored by Maiden. I have been using Made In products for quite some time now, and I have been loving them. The one cool thing about their stainless steel collection is it is made in Italy. They partner with multi-generational factories to create a restaurant quality product for the home chef, or cook in my case. The awesome thing about the 5-clad stainless steel frying pan is that it goes all the way from the bottom to the top, so it has great heat retention and evenly cooks things. I just added some avocado oil to this pan. Now we're gonna add our onions, and I'm gonna slowly cook these in this pan. This is their 10-inch frying pan, and the nice thing about their design is the handle is ergonomic, and it's designed not to get hot so that you can actually hold onto the handle and transfer it from the stovetop into the oven. And these pans are designed to be safe up to 800 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you're cooking something like a steak, you sear it on both sides and you want to finish it in the oven, it is perfect for that. You all know I love stainless steel, and I've been really happy with these pans. So I just added a couple teaspoons of salt to this. The reason I wanted to add salt to this is I want the onions to start to sweat, release some of their moisture. We need that moisture to evaporate before we can get some beautiful caramelization on these onions. Some of my favorite pieces of cookware that I've used in my kitchen on a daily basis have been gifts from the ones I love. And the awesome thing about that is I think about them every time I use that piece of equipment. So if you know someone who's in the market for some high quality stainless steel pots and pans, Made In will be the first link down in the description box. Or if you indeed are the one who needs some high quality pots and pans and you want to give yourself the gift of some high quality stainless steel ones, they will be the first link down in the description box. There's a special offer just for you, and I want to thank Made In for sponsoring today's video. Those onions are going to take a little bit of time to caramelize, so I just sliced up these onions, and we are going to do another slow cooker dinner tomorrow. So I will go ahead and use these as meal prep for tomorrow. And then we also need a lot of garlic. And I have gone through all of the pre-chopped garlic. We're gonna need this again a couple times before we're done with the cooking today. So we get to peel and chop some garlic. So that's what I'm gonna do now, is get some of that done. And then we have all of the components we basically need to prep. We're gonna add some herbs and things like that, but we can do that in a little bit. I have 2 heads of garlic. I am going to peel all this garlic, and we're gonna add all of this garlic to our sauce. The garlic that I grew this year, or the majority of the garlic that I grew this year, was a variety called Rocambole. That one didn't look so good. It was a very mild garlic. It's delicious, but it doesn't have a very strong flavor. And so I'm gonna need to use a lot of it to get the garlic flavor I want in this. So I just turned this down a little bit because a lot of the moisture is already starting to evaporate. I just added a touch more oil. The goal is not to brown that onion, it is to caramelize it, which does take a little bit of time. And then as soon as I get this garlic chopped, we're gonna get going on our pumpkin cinnamon rolls, which will be good because those need to rise for some time. We're gonna have pumpkin cinnamon rolls for dessert tonight. And so is my sister, because she's gonna get surprise cinnamon rolls with her tomato drop-off. I've always wanted to make pumpkin cinnamon rolls, and we're going to do this technique that's a little different that I keep, well, I guess it's not different anymore because I keep seeing it all over online, and we're going to put cream in our cinnamon rolls before we bake them. So our garlic is done, our onions are about halfway done, so we should be able to pull this bread dough together relatively quickly. I'm gonna make this dough in the mixer because it's just gonna be a lot easier because this dough does need to knead. And this recipe does call for quick rise yeast, which I rarely ever have, but I happen to have some today. And it's 1 4-ounce package, which is one of these. And the nice thing about quick rise yeast is you don't have to proof it first. So you can just, like it says, get your recipe going quickly. Get that that in there. I'm just gonna give that a quick mix. I don't even know if there's enough in there to mix it. Now I'm gonna add a 1/4 cup of sugar and 3/4 of a cup of our pumpkin puree that we pureed together last year. And I probably have about a tablespoon left in here, maybe 2. I'm just gonna add all of that. No need to figure out what else to do with that. This recipe needs 1 egg. I'm gonna put a splash of vanilla. Oh, I don't have vanilla in there. I keep thinking I do. I need to refill that. But I've got vanilla in here. Calls for pumpkin pie spice, which I happen to not have right now. So I'm just gonna make it up with cinnamon, a tiny bit of clove, ginger, nutmeg. This is fresh nutmeg that I'm gonna grate. Now I'm gonna go ahead and get in our bread flour. That's 4 cups. And the last thing we're gonna add is salt. Now I'm gonna mix this together.
Well, I'm blissfully unaware at this point that that is not the final ingredient. I forgot one really important ingredient, and we will be back to fix our mistake in just a minute. But while that's kneading, I'm gonna go ahead and take down one of these tables. This is my tomato ripening station. Since I've had a garden, I've kind of always had a tomato ripening station, and I usually put a tablecloth or a towel down to let them ripen on. And I don't think I'm gonna need this second table for the rest of the year. So we're gonna go ahead and get this down. I just slip it behind the other table. I shake out the tablecloth, and then I'm able to get that tablecloth washed off and put back away.
I was rereading my recipe and I almost forgot the butter. So I'm gonna melt a 1/4 cup of butter and get this in here. Hopefully I can get it to mix in.
Now I go ahead and I add the butter. I would highly recommend not forgetting the butter in the initial making of the dough. I think that that dough is a goner, and I'm stressed out because I have it knead for probably 5 minutes with the butter poured on top, and it doesn't work. But I'll show you how I fix it, and we're able to salvage the dough. But I don't think it would have ever worked itself into the dough if I just left it on in the mixer. So you saw me, I added my garlic. I'm only going to cook that garlic for about 1 minute or so, just until it gets a little bit of that raw garlic flavor off. And I'm unloading the dishwasher with my jars. I just threw these jars in the dishwasher and washed them on a regular cycle. They're nice and clean now. I have a ton of different sizes. I want to focus mostly on pints, but I knew that I would probably want some more quarts too, so I just washed a bunch up. And now I'm going to go ahead and add my wine to the onions and garlic. Now I needed to do this in the made in stainless steel pot, not in the pot that I have my tomatoes in, because my tomatoes are cooking in them, and I didn't want to just add onions and the garlic and the wine to the tomatoes. I wanted to give them a good caramelization and cook and reduction before adding them to the tomatoes. So I cook this wine until it reduces about by half, and I do make sure I'm using a wine that tastes really delicious.
Well, I hope I did not ruin this dough, because it is not mixing in the butter. So this happens. I think I can fix it though. So I'm going to force in that butter into that dough. I might not be able to do it with the mixer, but a little bit of elbow grease can always help. I think crisis averted. That feels so good. And now our bowl is nice and greased. So I'm gonna get our dough back in here, get this covered, and we'll let this rise.
So here's my thinking with these tomatoes. I needed to get the tomatoes softened and cooked down before I could run them through the food mill, and I needed to get my onions, garlic, and wine cooking in a separate pot so that after we have softened tomatoes and we run them through the food mill, we can then marry the two together. So the original recipe says that you should roast the onions in the oven, which I never do because usually I'm doing so many tomatoes in the oven that I go ahead and I just do the onions in the pot that I end up cooking the marinara sauce in. But this time I'm just skipping the oven entirely, and I am cooking everything on the stove. So I pull out my tomato food meal. I can't figure out how to put it together. So I asked Josh if he's willing to put it together for me. So he comes in, he puts the food meal together. So while he's doing that, I decide to go ahead and just package up these tomatoes for my sister. I am so excited to be able to gift these tomatoes to a home where someone is going to be able to enjoy them. So I just put them in a paper bag and they can continue to ripen in the paper bag. I do end up doing a couple more harvests for my sister so that she has more than just the tomatoes to turn into sauce that is on this table. And the only tomatoes that I end up putting, or I plan to put up for the rest of the year, are 0. We are just going to eat the fresh tomatoes. Luckily around here, we generally can have fresh tomatoes until our first frost. And so that is what my goal will be. We put up diced tomatoes and a ton of the marinara sauce that we made earlier, and then you're going to see how much marinara sauce we get from these 2 batches. So total pounds of tomatoes that I turn into marinara sauce this year are 125 pounds of tomatoes, and that is a combination of heirloom tomatoes, Roma tomatoes, San Marzano tomatoes, cherry tomatoes, and just different slicing tomatoes. I really, really like the San Marzano variety. They're actually much drier than a Roma tomato, which is kind of interesting. Roma tomatoes are a paste tomato and they tend to be pretty dry, but seeing them side by side, the San Marzanos are even drier, which I absolutely love because, the drier the tomato is, the less time it takes to cook down. This sauce takes hours and hours and hours to cook down because I used cherry tomatoes and a ton of heirloom tomatoes. And so if you use a paste style tomato, you don't have to cook it down as long. But the one thing I don't like about the San Marzanos as opposed to the Roma tomatoes is they do not all ripen at the same time. Whereas my Roma tomatoes all ripened within about 2 weeks of each other. So I was able to get the majority of these 2 projects done within 2 days. If I like this stovetop method, I might do more San Marzanos next year and freeze all the tomatoes, and then I can pull them out of the freezer and do one huge processing day. But we'll just have to see kind of how this tomato sauce turns out and if I like it as opposed to the roasting version and what I decide to do for next year. I love my Roma tomato bush varieties, so we'll just have to see. You and I will figure it out next year what we end up doing.
Got all the tomatoes ran through. I need to run the pulp through one more time, but I need a bowl. I didn't want to fill these all the way up because I knew that they would be super heavy and this pulp is pretty hot, so I wanted just about that much. I'm gonna get this going back on high. Here, we now have our reduced wine. I think I'm gonna let this go a little bit longer. I'm gonna let this continue to simmer here while we run the pulp through one more time.
Now the only thing I'm changing in this recipe is how I'm cooking these tomatoes originally. Originally the recipe says to roast them, and I am cooking them on the stove. I'm not changing anything when it comes to the acidity level of this recipe. I'm keeping all of the ratios the same. So the ratio of the onion to tomato to the lemon juice that we're going to end up adding, all of that's the same. The only thing I'm changing is the cooking process to start the cooking process. And I will just let you know, this turns out fantastic. It is way, way less work and it is delicious. Now, the only thing though is I'm not getting the tomato skins because I don't really want to freeze dry the seeds and the skins together. So that's a downside of this process.
This is all the beautiful pulp we got out of running just the skins and seeds through one more time. And those skins and seeds that are left, that's just gonna go to the chickens because I have enough skins that I saved. I don't wanna freeze dry the seeds, so that's just gonna go to the chickens. Now this wine looks beautiful. So I'm gonna get this wine, onion, and garlic mixture into this stock pot. I'm going to crank the heat on high, and we are going to just reduce and simmer this away. See how runny that is? This is going to simmer for a few hours, probably at least 3. The reason this is going to have to simmer for so long is because we used a lot more heirloom varieties and the cherry tomatoes are very, very liquidy. But now we have no skins, no seeds. We just need this to cook down. I want it to cook down until it's thick and beautiful. So probably 3 hours, if not longer. The last batch we did, it took at least 2 hours. I've got a couple more ingredients I'm actually gonna add to this right now. I'm gonna add 2 tablespoons of a non-iodized basil salt that I made. Might as well add basil because that's just deliciousness. Now remember, this is a 30-quart pot, so 2 tablespoons of salt in what is probably 20-ish quarts of tomato sauce is not that much. Now I'm gonna add one more ingredient, and that is a bunch of basil. The basil I grew did not do very well. I used what has grown in the last batch, so this is stuff I got at the store. And I just rinsed it off, and I'm just gonna throw the whole leaves in there, and then we're gonna blend it up.
Canning is a science. It is not an art form. I like to say that every time I can with you all because you need to be very careful when you're changing recipes. There are modifications you can do to still have a safe canning product, but before you start modifying any recipes, I highly recommend that you have a very good understanding of safe canning practices first. And so I am comfortable, starting this tomato process out on the stove as opposed to in the oven because I'm not changing any of the ingredients that could change the acidity level, because the recipe does say once you roast them, run them through a food mill and then finish it on the stove and cook it down to the thickness you desire. So that's what we're doing. So the only thing we skipped was how we started softening the tomatoes so that they would be soft enough to run through the food mill. So now that I've got that cooking, I'm just going to do a little bit of cleaning.
So now what I want to do is roll out our dough. I was a little worried about this dough that it wasn't going to turn out right, but it's been sitting there for quite some time and it's looking really beautiful. Look at that. Look at the color. Oh yeah, it's nice and bouncy. Oh my goodness. This would make a really fun Thanksgiving morning breakfast or Christmas morning breakfast if your family, oh yeah, it's nice and fluffy, likes cinnamon rolls. I did take this dough and I had it sitting between my slow cooker and this big pot so that it would rise a little bit quicker, because I think the order that I put in the ingredients is having a little bit harder time rising. I just can't get over the color of this dough. It's beautiful. So I'm gonna try to get this to roll out into a rectangle if I can. And we're supposed to get 12 cinnamon rolls out of it. I need to get out some of the other ingredients we need to fill this, because this is gonna need to do a second rise. This dough is tender enough that I don't even need to get out a rolling pin. I can just do this by hand.
We are going to fill these cinnamon rolls with butter, brown sugar, a little bit of white sugar, and cinnamon. The recipe doesn't call for white sugar, but I didn't have quite enough brown sugar and I didn't feel like making brown sugar, so we're just going to substitute with a little bit of white sugar. But going back to the tomato sauce. Now, tomato sauce, again, is a science, so you can't just make up your own recipe, can it, and it be safe. It's best to follow a recipe. And so I can leave some resources for you for some free resources for canning if you're, new to it and you want to read up on it. The National Home Food Preservation website is the gold standard for safe canning techniques. And I can also link, the cookbooks that are approved canning recipes down below for you as well. Now, if you want to make your own marinara sauce and you don't want to can it and you want to follow whatever your heart desires, then whatever your heart desires, then you can freeze it. That's another great option. You do not have to can it. The reason I like to can my tomato sauce is it tastes just as good if it comes through the canning process. Some things, change flavors because canning, when you boil something for a long time or you put it in pressure, it can kind of put it through a second cooking process and it can change the flavor. And so some things we just don't prefer canned. We'd prefer frozen and or fresh. And so tomato products, though, are delicious if they go through the canning process. So I love having them jarred up and on my pantry shelf so that they don't have to take up room in my freezer, and I can use my freezer for other things. And the other thing is, now that I have started making marinara sauce and not just crushed tomatoes, I'm not jarring up any crushed tomatoes this year. I have some from last year, so I don't want to put any on my pantry shelf because I have enough. That's why I'm gifting the excess tomatoes I have to friends and my sister. I do have other people that kind of harvest off my garden as well, friends that come over and everyone leaves with goodies, vegetable goodies. And so I forgot what I was saying. Oh, so because I am now turning them into marinara sauce and not just crushed tomatoes, that's a convenience item for me where I can open the jar, brown up some, Italian sausage and cook some noodles, and then I have some homemade spaghetti in minutes. I don't have to, turn a crushed tomato into a marinara sauce. It is already done. And so if it's frozen, then I have to remember to thaw it. And so that just kind of takes a little bit of the convenience out of it for me. But that's my preference. We all have our own preferences, and this is now working really, really well for me. But if you want to just make up your own tomato sauce recipe, go ahead and throw it in the freezer, and it will be absolutely delicious.
So our cinnamon rolls are ready to bake here in just a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and preheat my oven. I do have them sitting kind of close to this pot because they are rising slower than I would expect. So this pot is nice and warm, so it's going to help them just finish rising. Here is what our marinara is looking like, and it's looking beautiful. It has reduced from about right here to there, but I still don't think it is as thick as I want it. So it probably has another, 2 hours maybe. I do want to taste this for seasonings now that it's reduced quite a bit and see if it tastes like the roasted marinara sauce. Oh, I did not taste that yet. I almost forgot a very, very important ingredient. I would have looked through my recipe one more time, so I wouldn't have forgot it, but I'm glad I remembered it before I tasted it because this is going to affect the flavor of it. I've not added any black pepper yet, and I need to add my lemon juice. And I need to add 1 full cup of lemon juice that is bottled. So I have bottled lemon juice here, hopefully. Oh my goodness. I have exactly 1 cup. I used it for something else, and I remember thinking, I shouldn't use all of that because I'm going to need it. And luckily, I still had enough for this recipe. Now I need to add about a tablespoon of black pepper. That's probably good there. Now, one of the reasons I want this nice and thick is so that when I use it in a pasta sauce, it's nice and thick for me already. And if I want to open a jar and use this as a marinara in a lasagna, instead of having to cook it down to get it thick, to use it in a lasagna or chicken parmesan or something like that, it's worth taking the time right now to cook it down. It's already on the stove cooking down, and then when I go to open it, it's ready to go, and it's a convenient item for me. I used to can all of my tomato products as just crushed tomatoes, and I would usually not take the time to reduce it to a thick sauce, and then when I would go to use it, I had to do something with it. I had to thicken it and turn it into a marinara sauce, and I have just found that having it ready to go on the pantry shelf is what I like, and it's worth putting the effort in. But I'm excited to see if this is just as good as without roasting it in the oven. I mean, it's gonna be delicious. We're gonna eat this, but next year I'm gonna see if I need to roast all of it in the oven or if I can do it this way. And the other reason I want this to get thick is I wanna use it as a pizza sauce as well as a marinara sauce. I've already used it as pizza sauce once, and it was fantastic, so I don't want it too runny. So if I put it on pizza, I don't want it to be too runny. Now, I don't put the oregano. The recipe calls for oregano and bay leaves. I don't put that in there. Bay probably would be fine, but I don't love how strong oregano gets, so I always skip it out of this part. And if I want oregano in my lasagna or something, I'll add it when I cook it. That is so good, but it needs some more salt. And I'm gonna add another tablespoon of the basil salt. And I like to scrape the sides down every once in a while because it gets really thick and I don't want it to burn on the sides, and I want that thick tomato paste-like sauce in my sauce. So I'm gonna grab a new spoon. Okay, delicious. I do think it needs some more pepper. And I think we are there. So we're just gonna let this cook down and thicken up for quite some time. So far, I can't really tell a difference between this sauce and the roasted sauce. I'm gonna let this cook down a little bit, and then maybe I'll do a side-by-side comparison. I'll open 2 jars or something like that and give it a taste test. This was a whole lot easier. So if I'm happy with the final product of this is the way I will do it, where I'll follow the same recipe. So the amount of tomatoes, to the onions, to the lemon juice, the wine, all those good things, the garlic, and then I will just cook it in a pot as opposed to cooking it in the oven, because my kitchen stayed a lot cleaner and this took a fraction of the time. So I think what I'm gonna do now, well, my oven's still preheating. Once my oven's preheating, we're gonna add the final ingredient to these cinnamon rolls before we throw them in the oven. And I need to make the cream cheese frosting, so let me do that right now. I did not realize that this glaze or frosting that we're making is maple flavor, and how delicious is that gonna go with our cinnamon rolls? So here I have, I think this is a half cup and I only need a quarter cup. Yes, I only need a quarter cup. So I'll just do a little less than this. So I have butter, cream cheese that I softened in the fridge, and we're gonna do some powdered sugar and now some maple syrup. And I'm just gonna get this made up. This is gonna be totally fine if it just sits in my mixer while our cinnamon rolls finish their rising and then bake. Whoop. So that is our frosting or glaze. There's not very much of it, but it should have good flavor because of the cream cheese. So I'm just gonna let this hang out here while we finish everything else up. So these cinnamon rolls are gonna be shareable cinnamon rolls because I was supposed to make 12 and I only made 2, 4, 6, 8. So they're gonna take longer to bake. So I think I'm actually gonna reduce my temperature to 325 to make sure that they get cooked fully through and the outside doesn't get cooked before the inside is cooked, because there is nothing that is more disappointing. I'm sure that's not true. There are things that are more disappointing, but it is very disappointing to have a not fully cooked cinnamon roll. So we're gonna get this powdered sugar put away. And then the trick or the technique that I have seen go around online, you all have seen it many times. I am late to actually trying this out. And that's actually to pour cream over the top of cinnamon rolls. I don't know how much cream because this recipe doesn't call for it, but I have seen, and I'm sure you have seen, where you take canned cinnamon rolls and then you pour cream over the top and bake them, and it's supposed to be delicious, so that's what I'm gonna do. And this is gonna work out perfect. Josh and I will keep these little ones, and I'll give this one to my sister because she has 3 kids and a husband. And I really wanted to practice this to see if I wanted to do this technique with Christmas cinnamon rolls. Are you supposed to put it on the top? I don't know. Are you just supposed to put it around? I don't know. I probably should have done a little more research, but I think we're gonna go with that. I decided I want those to rise for another 15-20 minutes before I bake them. So I'm gonna get this plastic wrap on them, get them back by the warm stove, and then I'm gonna prep what I need here, which are my canning jars. I've already washed them. I have a whole new stack of clean towels here. They just need to be put away, but I'm actually gonna put some towels down here. And I'm just gonna get these jars ready to go. Dinner is all ready for me, so I don't have to worry about that. So I figured I would just get these jars set up over here easier to fill jars over here than over here. I also washed these lids so they wouldn't have the factory dust on them. I want to fill all these pints first before I start filling the quarts. I think I have way more jars than I need, but I usually do that. I wash way more than I need because I don't like hand washing jars. And so I would rather just have more jars than I need. So now I'm gonna go ahead and get some rings out. I do wash my rings in the dishwasher after I use them in the canning process. You don't have to do that. I just like to do that so that they are nice and clean.
Now my sauce is thick and I have my cinnamon rolls in the oven. So those are cooking away, and while those are cooking, I'm gonna go ahead and start jarring up this beautiful marinara sauce. Now one reason I want to jar more in pints is I love having pint marinara sauce on my pantry shelf for a couple of reasons. But before I tell you those, I want to tell you I'm taking the temperature of the cinnamon rolls because I was having a hard time telling when they were done because they're orange and I put the cream in. And so if you want to know if your dough is done on baked goods like breads and things, you want the dough or the bread product to be about 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and that will ensure that your dough is not going to be, or your bread is not going to be doughy on the inside. So that's what I was doing. And then I just have peace of mind that when it reaches 200 degrees, I'll take it out of the oven and it'll be perfectly cooked. So here I'm wiping the rims, I'm filling the jars, and we're going to get a new lid and ring on these jars, and then we're going to can them for the time the recipe says. But the reason I've been enjoying pints is because some recipes I don't need an entire quart, whether it's a pasta sauce and I want to thin it out with some cream, or if I'm doing a smaller amount of chicken parm and I don't need a whole quart, then I can just open that up and put the marinara sauce on the chicken. And my new favorite is using this sauce as pizza sauce. So I made pizza sauce last year and the recipe was fantastic. It tasted absolutely incredible, but it was a freezer recipe and not a canning recipe. And this goes back to trying to figure out, what do I like to put in the freezer and what do I like to put on my pantry shelf? And I've learned pizza sauce for me is a pantry shelf item. Pizza is Josh's probably all-time favorite food. And so I found myself not making pizza very much last year because I would forget to thaw the sauce. And so I want to make pizza more because he really enjoys it. I really enjoy it. And I want to have it pantry or shelf stable. And so that's why I'm canning up a lot more pints so that I don't have to open an entire quart and then have to figure out what to do with the rest of the sauce. So this is my new favorite, just making one sauce recipe and making it so that it's versatile for multiple things. And that is a reason why I wanted to make sure it was nice and thick so that you didn't have runny, watery pizza sauce. Now, I actually don't even know the difference. Maybe you know the difference and you can share with all of us what is technically the difference between pizza sauce and marinara sauce. Now, I would probably venture to guess that traditional pizza sauce doesn't have wine in it, and this pizza sauce has wine in it. But I love wine in my cooking. I think it tastes delicious. I didn't grow up in a household that used wine in any sort of cooking, and as an adult I have found that I love that flavor. So a little bit of wine cooked down in my pizza sauce, no big deal. So here is the cinnamon rolls. We enjoyed this for dessert. These cinnamon rolls were so good. Let me show you what they look like on the inside. Between the pumpkin spice, the maple, the cream cheese, we loved them. I packaged them up. I gave actually some to my mother-in-law and some to my sister, and then we enjoyed the rest. They were so good. This canning day did not end until around 8 o'clock. By the time I got the jars processed, the sauce thickened, and all the good stuff, it was a long day in the kitchen, but a lot less labor intensive, and it was a lot actually less time of me in the kitchen. There were a lot more breaks that we're able to have throughout the cooking day because I didn't have to slice each individual tomato in half lay it flat on a cookie sheet, throw it in the oven, and roast it. I probably will do this method next year. I mean, only time will tell what I end up doing next year. Every year is a little bit different. I'm always trying to become more efficient and find our favorite recipes and, find new recipes and things like that. So maybe I'll do it completely different next year. Only time will tell. But for now, I am super grateful to be able to put these goodies on my pantry shelf. And I'm excited that the rest of the abundance coming out of my garden is going to be gifted to the ones I love. So if you want to watch more of my videos, I'll pop some here. You can go enjoy them between now and my next upload. I want to thank every one of you for being here, taking time out of your day to hang out with me. I greatly appreciate every single one of you, and I can't wait to see you next time. Good night, friend.